Hi, I'm Brian Richardson, serial entrepreneur and founder of PrepToExit.com, where we're teaching business owners how to sell their companies. So we're here today on phase 4, which is the deal-making phase of selling your company. There's only one more phase after this. And you may be a little surprised of like, wait a minute, we're just now getting into the deal and it's phase 4 of 5? Yes. The transaction of selling a company is so much more complex than selling a house. Selling a house, it's pretty well formatted. There's very little negotiation of price beyond a couple percentage points. Selling a business is vastly more complex. And so now we're going to get into the dynamics of deal making. So this is a summary video just to give you a big picture view of what goes on in this phase of the company. And I love using this writing mechanism to make my points because so many business owners are like myself where visual representations and diagrams and colors really drive information home versus just reading. It took me 3 years to be able to understand what I needed to be able to sell a company. So I'm using my my professor skills when I was a professor at a university to be able to get across to you in a visual format in addition to an auditory format this information. So what we're going to cover today is about 5 different sections of the deal making phase. We're going to talk about interacting with a buyer and whether they are seeing the same thing that we are seeing and making sure that one does equal 1 and not something else. We're going to talk about motivating the buyer and the carrot of motivating them to move forward with the deal. We're going to talk about negotiation and how it's so dramatically different in selling a company than it is anything else that you've ever sold. We'll talk about the letter of interest a little bit. We'll talk about expectations and then also danger signs and warning signs. Okay, so let's get to the first topic, which is being able to understand the buyer. Again, let me go back and hit something I talked about in an earlier video. A buyer has a completely different approach and perspective on your company than you do. When I was selling my companies, I was thinking that, oh, there's all of this that could be done and there's all of this value and all of this potential. But the reality is a buyer is coming in and they're looking about how my company is going to fit into their portfolio, how it's going to add value, expand into a different profit sector, gain more customers in the same sector, change their footprint. It might double their size. It might just be 1/10 of their size. So when my company is all of my life, the buyer may just see this as another branch of their existing corporation. So we have to, as sellers, we have to try to get into the mind of the buyer. The more time that we can spend interacting with them and the better we understand their business, the better off it is. So it's really hard as a seller, as a human being, to interact with a buyer and not give away critical information. It's very, very difficult. It's like a poker game, a high stakes poker game. The more you reveal, the bigger disadvantage you are. And so I'm a very transparent person. I'm a very open person. I love to communicate. And so I should not represent myself in a deal. I should limit my interactions with the buyer because they'll get information from me that they can leverage against me, and then I wind up having a smaller price point or deal value for my business. So again, this is one of those aspects where a broker with experience or an investment maker with experience is going to be able to pick up on a lot of clues from all of their experience, all of their interactions with buyers before, the little clues that help you understand what the buyer's perspective is. Now, communication styles, right? So you may think that, oh, my balance sheet says that there's one of these on here. But in reality, they may look and say, oh, really? Well, the situation on your balance sheet is that asset is really only a 0.5, right? So you may think that, oh, I've got these 3 trucks, these 3 boom trucks, and they're only 5 years old, and they're great. They're a 1. And the buyer may say, well, you know what? We actually have our own fleet, and so we don't want any of your trucks at all, so we're not going to give you any value for that truck whatsoever. So that's one of those, just because it's on the balance sheet this way doesn't mean that they're going to see it that way, and they're going to completely look at it in a different perspective. Okay? All right, so now let me talk a little bit about sorry about that. Okay, let me talk about motivating the buyer, right? So you've got to be able to get the buyer moving forward. And there may be on the calendar January, February, March, April, May. There's these dynamics in the seasons where they may not be busy in January or February, but they may start getting busy right in the spring. Let's say they remodel homes, right? They're a construction firm that does a lot of remodeling, so they get really busy in the springtime, taking on projects, signing on projects, hiring staff, etc. Now it may be that you were really busy. You were really busy in January and February, and then you stopped being busy in January and February. Well, guess what happens? All of a sudden, you become more available to communicate, and the buyer becomes less available to communicate. So the time from you wanting to interact with them, all of a sudden that loop takes a lot longer to close that communication loop. So interacting with the buyers at this aspect can become quite a delicate art. And so what you want to do is you want to find a way to be able to take this situation and shorten it down and motivate the buyer to start communicating quicker and increase the percentage of actually getting to the close and getting to the next steps. So little motivations like that of getting the buyer to speed up, stay in the game. And one of the factors that happens here is time kills deals, right? So there's kind of a graph. And so this is motivation here, and then here is time. So what happens is, as time marches on, they may have been really motivated up here, but as time goes on, they may be all of a sudden not motivated whatsoever. So you want to be able to motivate them early in this process along here to hurry up and get done with the deal so that you can finish the deal and you can get paid for the closing on your deal before their motivation runs out and time sucks away their desire to buy your business. Okay, so that's a delicate art, let me tell you. It is one of the ploys. There's a number of ploys of being able to motivate a buyer. One of those is to say, oh, we have other potential buyers, we've had other offers. There's all sorts of way to try to use a carrot and a stick to be able to get a buyer to move quicker and to move forward. I'm not going to go into that. I just wanted to let you know that this is a dynamic that's going to be involved, and to make sure that time doesn't get away from you and you lose deals because the buyer just lingers on forever. Okay, now let's talk about negotiations. All right, so negotiations, oh my word, right? This is really something. I cannot stress how important this is. So they're going to get into due diligence in the next closing. Or I'm sorry, in the next phase. But the thing is that, again, on the balance sheet, you see a 1, they see a 0.5, or they see a 0. Okay? So you've got to figure out how to negotiate them to stop viewing it that way and to be able to see it as a 2, right? So like we were talking about the truck example, the boom, you've got 3 boom trucks. You've got to be able to figure out a way to negotiate. Well, I'll tell you what, with those 3 boom trucks, you're going to be able to do X, Y, or Z with them, and we're not going to charge you for it. Or I'll buy out those boom trucks, and then I'll sign them over to you at 15% value, but this is going to be a price shift in the buyout price. So there's all sorts of ways to be able to negotiate every little point of question or conflict that comes up. And again, if you're the type of person that doesn't like to negotiate, then this phase of the transaction is gonna just kill you. It's really gonna hinder you. It's really gonna steal a lot of money from you at closing. By having a broker or a third party involved that's able to negotiate with the buyer, to be able to recognize what the buyer values, that person is gonna drive up the total price of your company and drive up the total value of the buyout of your company, because they understand that fine art of negotiation. So just be aware of that. Be aware of your personal limitations. If you know you're not a good negotiator, consider having a third party involved to facilitate this aspect of your business, of the transaction, I'm sorry. Okay, so now we come to the letter of intent, or the LOI. And there's different names for this, but the concept is that there is an intent to purchase. Now, this is very, very different than than signing a purchase agreement on a house or any other product or a lease or anything like that. In buying a house, when you put an offer down, there is a binding legal dynamic to that. It's so binding that you'll lose a portion of your earnest money, or if not all of your earnest money. But with a letter of interest in buying a company, it is not binding whatsoever. It's just an intent. So the initial intent of buying your company and the initial bullet points of the buyout deal gets written down. And they're basically, the buyer is saying, I have an intent to purchase your company at X dollar point in X time period with X financial instruments. And so therefore we want to move forward. And the value of, even though the letter of intent is not a legal instrument, the value of it is it helps you close the door on all of the other suitors and focus your attention on working just with this one buyer. It's an extremely powerful tool. You're basically saying, okay, I'm done dating and now I'm engaged. I'm not married yet, but I'm engaged. All right. Make sure this letter of intent is well written. And again, an attorney, I'm going to put this on there because I want you to remember this. An attorney is very important to have to write this out. Even though it's non-binding, it's not legal, it's still important to have your bases covered right here. Okay, so the last thing I want to get to is managing expectations is the big E, right? All right, sorry about that. Is the big E of the expectations. There's been a lot of time spent so far in selling your company. If you get to this point, there's a lot of emotional energy. If you've gotten to this point, you and your life partner or spouse have had a lot of conversations. It's easy to get excited that you've got somebody that's giving you a letter of interest. You start thinking about the potential dollar amount you're going to get at the close. It's easy to start thinking about what you've spent. Please don't. Please don't. There's so many more landmines in front of you in the last phase of the closing. There's so many things that could go wrong still. Unlike selling a house, when you get an offer, getting an offer to buy your house is about a 90-95% guarantee that that's the person that's going to actually buy the house and the transaction is going to go through. That is not the percentage whatsoever in selling your business. There's still so much more to go in selling your company, and there's so many opportunities for it to crash, and they often typically do. So 50% of the businesses actually don't sell at due diligence. They don't even get past the due diligence phase. 90% of the companies that are listed never actually sell. So, so you're only at phase 4. You just got a letter of interest. So make sure that you keep your expectations down. This is just an engagement, and not even a sure engagement at this point. Like, you're thinking about being connected to this entity that's buying, but you're not wholesale sold on it yet. So just keep your expectations in line with that. There's lots and lots of different warning signs that can pop up in here, and this is, at this point in the game, is where the experience of a third party, a broker or investment maker, really comes into play, because they have enough experience to start recognizing the little red and yellow danger signs of a potential buyer, and it becomes even more and more critical at this point. Now, you can sell your company on your own. Just know that you've had an experience factor of 0 at this point, and the buyer may have an experience factor of 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 companies that they've purchased before. So all of a sudden, it's like going from running a foot race in 3rd grade to running a college level race. And this is the moment of the transition. When you go letter of intent, all of a sudden it's transitioning to college level game, and the stakes are a lot higher here. And just the smallest change in your gait, the smallest shoe choice even in that college track meet can definitely make a difference between the winner and a loser in that race. It can make the smallest difference with a buyer and the communication and all the aspects. That smallest difference here can completely crush a deal and destroy it. So there's too many warning signs to warn you about. I just want to let you know that it gets more complex at this point, and even further. So that's phase 4, and that's kind of a big picture view of what to expect in phase 4 in making the deal. The next phase is closing the deal. We talk about due diligence, we talk about negotiating the terms of the buyout, and what's involved in leading up to the close. This is Brian Richardson with PrepToExit.com, and I'm glad that you're sticking in here and getting the big picture about what it takes to sell your company.